Nathalie Niddam, your host, and we're back with a fantastic episode today. Let me ask you a question. What do chronic migraines, mitochondria, and perfumes have in common? Apparently, everything. My guest today, neuroscientist Dr. Elena Gross, went from crawling through 20 migraine days a month to running clinical trials at Oxford University and founding Brain Ritual, a company reimagining brain fuel. We unpack why your brain might be starving for energy even when you're full, how ketones can act like bomb neutralizers for oxidative stress, and why your favorite perfume might just be the new cigarette as far as your body's concerned. Now, this episode is brought to you by Regenerive, Stem Regen, and Young Goose's new blue peptide spray, all with special offers just for you. See the show notes below for details and enjoy the show. Welcome to the show, Dr. Elena Gross. It is an absolute pleasure to have you here today.
Nathalie, I'm super excited to talk about all things metabolism, longevity, whatever else comes to mind, brain health.
You know, it's interesting because, you're a neuroscientist and you were like, okay, we're going to talk about the brain. We're going to talk about the brain. And it's fascinating how conversations will often lead us to very common points of health that we're going to get to today. So I want to start first by talking about you a little bit. You're a neuroscientist, but you came to this out of from a very personal place. So do you want to tell the audience a little bit about what may have driven you to become a neuroscientist and even start to tackle this crazy problem called migraines?
Yeah, so to be fair, I was always fascinated by the brain in a way, because it's the organ that makes us who we are. It's the one organ we want to be a donor, not an acceptor, I guess. And I've been fascinated by it, but I started studying psychology and eventually had chronic migraine. They started when I was 14. And with 14, I was prescribed a contraceptive pill because I was hormone deficient. So my gynecologist thought that's a great idea. Just give her the pill because it has zero side effects. Of course, that's not true. Yes. I didn't know. And I was taking it. And half a year later, these debilitating one-sided headaches started. I had no idea what to do. My parents told me to just sleep it off, but I would wake up from them. I could only crawl to the bathroom trying to find painkillers. Nothing really worked. Eventually, I was taken seriously. They thought maybe I have a tumor or psychological problems. And this whole ordeal of trying to find out what's happening started, which many listeners that may have migraine might relate to. Sometimes it can be hard to even find a diagnosis to this. Eventually we did, and doctors told me this is migraine. Actually, Dr. Google told us before any doctor actually diagnosed it, because migraine is a condition that a medical doctor on average spends less than an hour with during 6 years of medical training.
Come on.
Even though it's the third most common disease in the world. That's how undereducated and underappreciated it actually is. So 1 billion people with migraine, and the average medical training has 1 hour on headache. And that includes a little bit of time on migraine.
Can we start by differentiating the difference between a headache and a migraine? Because I think often someone will say, I have a migraine, but I know personally, I don't get migraines, but I've had a couple of headaches that have made me think, oh, maybe this is what, like when your eyeballs hurt and you have this crazy pain over one eye. So I would love it if you could just spend a minute and help people to understand. And then let's continue with your story just to.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And so what makes a migraine a migraine? So typically you have to have more than one, I guess, to really differentiate it. But a migraine is typically, one point you already mentioned, is typically half-sided. So It can be both-sided, but typically it's half of the face or the head that's affected, at least initially. It's pulsating, sometimes burning pain, at least medium to very severe of in severity, pain level, right? Important, it has to come with associated symptoms. So you have to be either light, noise, smell sensitive. So these may hurt. You have to be nauseous, sometimes even sick. Moving has to make it worse for a normal headache, right? Sometimes you go for a walk, you drink some water. All of this would make it worse for a migraine. You cannot go to bed with it. So you usually would wake up from it because it's that painful, right? A headache, you can sometimes just, go to bed, you sleep, and it's gone the next day, like a mild headache. So moving makes it worse, medium to high in severity. And then associated symptoms, nausea, light sensitivity, and in a in a third of participants, it gets even more scary. So they have something called the aura phase, which is visual disturbances. So they get blackening of the visual field, they get zigzag lines, they start not being able to see, or it can go all the way to paralysis of parts of the body or numbness of the body. Or oftentimes also you have this slurred speech and difficulty thinking. And then you have other symptoms that precede the attack, like anxiety, agitation, thirst, yawning, food cravings, irritability. And then post-stroke, so after the attack, you have a phase where you feel like a hangover, completely fatigued and wiped out, and some other symptoms. So it comes in these 4 phases. And a tension type headache, like your normal headache, would be more like less sharp, less pulsating, more like all around the head, more like a pressure type of a headache. And, in migraine, also 70% of patients have neck pain as well. That's a very common symptom that comes with it. But tension type headache is like more diffuse.
Yeah.
And less severe, and typically like on your forehead, both sides, or like all of the head. So typically less severe in pain quality.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Okay. So doctor put you on the birth control pill because what the heck?
Yeah.
What could possibly go wrong?
I was on that for 14 years, and a lot of my problems probably come from that. So, yeah.
So did the headache stop? Did the migraine stop with the birth control pill, or they just kept going?
No, they appeared the first time ever. But after 14 years, so many things had gone wrong in my body that when I stopped, they didn't just stop as well, right? They remained chronic. So I was put on the birth control pill. We had a search. Nobody was connecting that half an hour apart. Okay, she has migraine. My grandma has migraine. Okay, so now I was like, okay, there's 1 billion people in the world. And then they told me, oh, now you have to find your trigger factors, and you have to go to bed the same time every night. You have to stop eating chocolate, no red wine for you, no cheese, no this, no that. I tried everything, nothing helped. I tried acupuncture and Chinese herbal medicine, and then I tried all the drugs, like the antidepressants, the anticonvulsants. And by the time I was halfway through my bachelor's degree, in psychology, my migraine had become chronic. So chronic means more than 15 days a month with pain, with migraine pain. And you can only take painkillers on about 10 days a month. Otherwise, your liver is struggling, you get addicted, all sorts of things can happen, medication overuse, headaches. So I was stuck in a dark room for way too long. And when I was accepted for neuroscience in Oxford, I basically had to be on anticonvulsant drugs. That let me forget the name of my best friend. And I nearly burned the college dorm down because I forgot I had put potatoes on for lunch, then went for a run. I mean, burning the house down with potatoes boiling in water, that's a hard challenge. And this is when I realized, look where it's come to, like even just to survive. I now have dementia and I still have incredible migraine pain, right?
You got into Oxford, like you, through all this, you're pursuing advanced, like very high level studies. That's incredible.
I had no idea. Looking back, I don't even know how I did it. I even passed quite well, but I basically dedicated everything at the time because I knew, okay, I'm studying neuroscience. I can't do a normal job. I have to do this to figure out what's going on because nobody else is doing it for me, right? There's no training on it. There's hardly any research on it. Nobody cares. I'm burning the house down because I can't function on this stupid anticonvulsant drugs. So we have to find a solution. And so this was the beginning of the end when I realized, okay, these anticonvulsants, I can't take them anymore. Tried everything. Modern medicine and alternative medicine have not given me any solutions. I'm on my own here and I have to figure it out. So this is how you get through Oxford with chronic disease. Also, I had a lot of support. Honestly, it's amazing. I got overtime because I would forget all the words in the exams. So they gave me overtime. They were taking me seriously. I was actually, for the first time in school, like I was missing so much school and they thought I would just not go to school, right? Which was not far from the truth. I had a lot of support. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made it for sure. But then I was actually given the chance to work with migraine patients. One was a cellular study, stem cell study, but one was with chronic migraine patients. And this is where the solution comes in. So I had stumbled across something way earlier than I had ever hoped for. I was working with these chronic patients in neuroimaging, and one time the scanner broke down. That patient had to come back 2 weeks later. And, chronic pain patients that kind of like crawl into the lab. Everything's too bright, too noisy. You can tell if you know they're not doing well, right? And this patient comes in and I almost didn't recognize her. She was walking upright and she was beaming and she lost weight. She looked like a changed person. And I asked her, like, oh my God, what have you done the last 2 weeks? And then she tells me, well, I have been fasting and I've even been drinking red wine every night and it didn't trigger a migraine. And I was there, I was like, what? So I had already developed a theory that migraine is this energy deficit in the brain, and it's warning us that the brain is running out of energy, right? So now this person hasn't eaten for 2 weeks. Like, how's she not completely starving in her brain, right?
Well, she's drinking wine.
She's drinking wine, and red wine, the number one trigger for migraine, right? So, okay, we scan her. And as a little thank you for every patient that came, we gave them biscuits. And that same night, she had the worst migraine again. So we triggered her migraine, sugary biscuits. So I was sitting in the library procrastinating from my second master's thesis, the first time in my life, flicking through a Nature magazine in real life. So it must have been fate, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
I flicked through that magazine and I come across an epilepsy special and the oldest treatment for epilepsy. And I knew at the time already epilepsy and migraine are related. And it turns out the oldest treatment for epilepsy is a fasting mimicking diet. And then all the puzzle pieces fell together. I read about ketones, believe it or not, in Oxford at the time, that's like 10 years ago. We were taught the brain is reliant on glucose, period. We didn't learn about ketosis, which is this fasting mimicking state in Oxford in neuroscience, right? So this was the first time I read upon this. All the mechanisms made sense. And I was like, okay, this is amazing. I'm going to try that on myself. Failed miserably for quite some time. There was not a lot of information at the time, but I also knew this is what I want to do in my PhD. But Oxford was like, way too risky. There's no data on this, and this is going to work. And long story short, this is how I ended up in Switzerland. Because tiny Switzerland was like, okay, if you come here, you can do that on a pilot trial. And we did it a bit differently. We did the first trial in the world on patients, randomized controlled trials using exogenous ketone bodies on a patient population. So in a nutshell, I know that was a very long story.
Hey folks, I just wanted to take a quick minute to tell you about something that I've created just for you guys, my listeners. I've created an amazing holiday gift guide for listeners so that you can get the best Black Friday deals on biohacking tools, supplements, and so much more. There are gifts in different price ranges and once a year price drops on your dream health tech. And no one said you can't shop for yourself. So you can get the stuff for friends and family or for yourself. All you've got to do is go to natniddam.com/gift guide for the list of Black Friday deals that you just can't miss.
The brain can basically, if the brain is not good on glucose metabolism, which my patient's brain, that chronic migraine patient, she was not very good at using glucose. So even though she was eating adequate calories, her brain was starving the whole time because she couldn't use those calories. So one of the biggest aha moments for me is we can stuff ourselves. We can be extremely overweight. We can eat all the calories in the world. It doesn't mean that our brain and some of our cells have energy. So you can feast and starve your brain at the same time. That was happening in that patient. So when she was fasting, that alternative energy source for the brain was being manufactured in her liver, and her brain had energy for the first time since birth, probably. But nobody made the connection, so I didn't know. I mean, that patient, I always hope that one day she's going to listen to one of this podcasts and hear it, because at the time I couldn't help her, right? I couldn't tell her what's going on. So she's probably still suffering a lot. I hope not.
Well, unless she went back to fasting, and basically she was putting herself into a ketogenic state, right?
Which she doesn't know, right? And you can't fast forever.
No, you will start.
Eventually, you will start. With the epilepsy patients, right? They realize, if we fast them, the attacks are drastically reduced. We can't fast them forever, so we'll imitate fasting in a diet, right? Yeah. But that poses some problems. Now, later on, I realized actually on my own journey, my liver was in a pretty bad state with like decades of medication overuse. The only way to stay alive in Oxford and pass that degree was overusing painkillers, because otherwise you can't find it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your liver is the organ that makes ketone bodies. And maybe we have to even quickly say what they are. But in the end, I was struggling on the diet, and my brain was eventually, when I got into ketosis, my brain was so much better, but my body wasn't. So that's where eventually we decided to not force the liver to make ketone bodies, because also it's hard to control in a trial and we want to prove a point. And so we went to make or have ketone bodies made in the lab to be then taken on top of a hopefully healthy diet, right? So that was then the idea and solution. But maybe just quickly, 1 or 2 sentences on what is this ketosis? What is this fasting state, right?
Yeah. And also, what type of ketones are you using? Because there's the ketone salts, there's ketone esters,
That's a great question. And it's so important to know the difference, especially if you are a patient or if you're interested in longevity, you should know the difference.
Okay.
But coming back to these ketosis is basically a state where so-called ketone bodies are elevated in the blood. And ketone bodies are small chain fatty acids. So they're basically fat-derived small molecules that can get into the brain in addition to glucose to fuel it properly. And they can also fuel the heart very well. Now, why is that even an issue, or why is that even relevant? Well, if you go back 10,000 plus years when we were still hunter-gatherers, we would roam around. There would not be a lot of glucose at all times, right? Maybe in summer, maybe some tubers, but there would be extended periods of time where we would not have glucose around. Now you might say, who cares? You have fatty acids, right? You have fat stores, you have protein, but fat and protein are too large to make it into the brain. And that's important to know, because the brain is a very special organ when it comes to metabolism. One, and this is relevant for everybody who has a brain, so everybody listen up. The brain is only 2% of your body's mass, but it uses more than 20% of the energy that the body creates. So it's a very energy-hungry organ. But it's surrounded by a skull, pretty hard. So you can't really store energy in the brain at all, which is also why if you get a seizure or if you have a traumatic brain injury, you are basically getting neurodegeneration, neuronal loss within minutes, because there's just no backup fuel. If there's no supply from the rest of the body, if that's disturbed, you're in trouble. So a lot of energy demand protected by the blood-brain barrier means that big energy-dense molecules cannot get in there. So the brain is reliant on 3 main fuel sources. 1, glucose. That can be ineffective for some, right? And it cannot be stored very well. Even in a let's say bigger person, 24 hours of energy maximum, then that these glucose stores are deprived, called glycogen. Then we have lactate. Lactate is around when you do exercise. Lactate is not around a lot in anybody who is a patient, because a migraine patient exercise is a trigger. If you're doing very unwell, you're not going to run around creating lactate. So there's a third option, kind of a rescue option, and that's the ketone bodies. So if you don't have the first 2 around, or you're not very good with them, ketone bodies are essential. And they can pass through the blood-brain barrier and, in that sense, feed the brain. So this is why they're important. And 10,000 plus years back, all of us used to be hybrid cars.
Yeah.
We would be able to use glucose when it was around, and we would equally be able to switch to petrol for longer routes, or for some periods without electricity or plug to charge up, right? In today's world, we're all electric cars. If you don't find a plug every 2 to 3 hours, we're out of fuel. And then the brain is the first organ that suffers, because it's so energy hungry, right? So that's important. So then it turns out ketone bodies are not just an alternative fuel source. They're more effective. They're the preferred fuel source for the brain when it's available. But they're also a signaling molecule. And this is where it comes, all the longevity topics come in that are very important. It's anti-inflammatory. It reduces inflammation in the body. It's antioxidant. So when it's burned, it creates less oxidative stress, which is one of the number 1 determinants for aging. And it's a potent antioxidant itself. So it catches these free radicals. And for those that don't know, free radicals are basically very reactive molecules, a little bit like bombs. So whatever they touch, they destroy. And antioxidants are the bomb neutralizers. So the ketone bodies are the bomb neutralizers, and they create more bombs when they're burned. They have a positive impact on the gut microbiome because they are close to butyrate in form and shape. So the microbiota is one of the big factors that determines whether a ketogenic diet in epilepsy is successful, for example. They reduce hyperexcitability in the brain. Super important for conditions like ADHD, epilepsy, and migraine. So they shift the equilibrium between the excitatory glutamate towards the inhibitory, so the calming GABA. Exactly. And they have a whole, I probably forgot, they have positive effects on mitochondria. I probably forgot quite a few mechanisms, but they're signaling molecules and which is kind of like a hormone-like effect, and they're metabolites. So they can feed you and they can do positive things in the body.
I think what's amazing also about the ketones is, when you're talking about providing fuel to the brain, one of the reasons why, you didn't mention this, and maybe because you're thinking, let's not get too far in the weeds, but one of the reasons why glucose can be around is the transporters that allow glucose to get into the cell become insulin resistant. I think that's part of the reason why Alzheimer's is referred to as type 3 diabetes sometimes. And the ketone uses a back door, like it doesn't need the transporter.
It needs insulin. Exactly. So there's different glucose transporters if we want to go down that rabbit hole a little bit further.
Yeah. Well, we don't have to go too deep, but it's
in the brain, there's glucose transporters that don't need insulin. So glucose can quickly flood the brain with glucose, but the neurons are insulin dependent. I think this is what the problem is. If your body is full of glucose, it will flood into the brain without being regulated, but then you become insulin resistant inside of the brain because the neurons are insulin dependent in transport of the glucose and the astrocytes, which is helper cells. So then, exactly as you said, Alzheimer's is known as type 3 diabetes, because then you can develop even insulin resistant inside of the brain, which means you have plenty of glucose, but your neurons are starving because they can't take it in. And ketone bodies have this alternative transport system. They use a different tunnel to get in, which is then amazing. Some people with Alzheimer lighting up again.
Yeah.
But I don't want this to be all about ketosis, because that's just one aspect. If we look at this more from a evolutionary biology perspective, I always try to look at things that are very common from an evolutionary lens. Anything that is more frequent than 0.5 or 1% of the population is not a genetic problem, not primarily, because it's too common. If those were just accidental mutations that are just deleterious, they wouldn't have passed on over the hundreds and thousands of years.
Right.
So if something is affecting 1 billion people, such as migraine, or I don't know how many percent they are, I think it's 1 or 2% with depression, or even more these days, that's not primarily genetic issue. So these genes have been passed on. So they must have had an evolutionary advantage, which in reverse means it's our current environment that leads to these genes expressing suboptimally.
Yeah.
And the beautiful news about this is, and that's why we're here, I guess, longevity. If you want to live longer, I think we don't have to look for the next drug that's developed in the future. We have to turn to the past. Because a lot of the wisdom is in the past. And that's why I try to look at things from an evolutionary perspective or evolutionary biology. Now, one thing that has for sure changed is the absence versus presence of ketone bodies, which is why we put, and we can talk about what ketone bodies I use. One sentence, everything I put into my body is bioidentical, human identical. I don't want anything that is not bioidentical, or if it's not, then it must be extensively tested, right?
Yeah, kind of like the same. So I guess that brings us to the conversation about what ketones are you using when you're in your studies, with your patients, and with yourself?
Yes, and maybe before we go to that, I want to introduce one more concept, which is not only the ketone bodies, once they're in your system, they need to be burned inside of the mitochondria. Now, we can talk about mitochondria later. They're the powerhouses of the cell. But what is super crucial is if you want to burn them, a bit like if you put petrol in your car and you don't have water and oil, you can't use the petrol very well. Same thing, the ketone bodies need to be burned inside of the mitochondria, and they need cofactors to work. Today's diet, even if you're on the healthiest diet, chances are, depending on where your vegetables or your cow is grazing, you will not have adequate micronutrients to actually fully have optimal mitochondrial functioning and burn ketone bodies or even glucose or fatty acids effectively. So that's why I always recommend, and in the product, if you might do the brain ritual, if you want to discuss it later, it's also very important to look at things like trace minerals. So they're very deprived of. These are substances that people might have never heard of. I hadn't. This is molybdenum, this is boron, this is chromium, this is all these things that you may never heard of, but they're essential. Manganese. Who
Yeah.
knows about manganese? We all know about magnesium now, but who
Yeah.
knows about manganese? It's super critical also for antioxidant defense. If you want selenium, right? Then we have the electrolytes. You probably heard of them, but especially if you live in the US, quite a few biohackers, and if you're listening to your podcast, Nathalie, they probably know that you should probably be filtering your water or drinking filtered water in the US, right? But that's the absence of toxins. That doesn't equal that this water is now hydrating you very well. You can kill yourself with filtered water. Drink enough filtered water, you're dead. Because we need electrolytes to get the water properly inside of the cells and have an equilibrium. So magnesium, calcium, potassium, sodium, essential. And then we have to have all these B vitamins, ideally in methylated form. We have the fat-soluble vitamins A and D. You probably know about D being important. We have A and E, mixed tocopherols, right? We need amino acids, taurine and L-carnitine to shuttle fatty acids inside of the mitochondria, taurine to help the liver detox and do its job. And we have antioxidants like CoQ10 that are essential to keep your mitochondria healthy when they are burning stuff. So basically, you need more than just the ketones. And all of this stuff, if we go back from the evolutionary perspective, right, 10,000 plus years ago, that would have been in the animal or the soil.
Okay.
Now today, with all the agriculture, the manufacturing, the monocrops, our soils are just deprived of stuff. Our mineral waters, who drinks mineral water from a spring? It's really hard, right? You filter your water, but that means it's a dead water. So these things are important to also just be aware of. Because I was always thinking in terms of calories. And then I started with ketones. I started to think in terms of macronutrients.
Yeah.
But that's not enough, right? There's these little things that are small, but they're super essential as well. So it's that. And then if we again go back 10,000 years, it's not only the presence of certain things, it's also the absence of other things.
Right.
And that's why we might have a more increased demand today for antioxidants and other things, because we have also introduced about 80,000 or so new substances in the last 50 years.
Yeah.
80,000 new chemicals that are floating around and they're getting into our cells and into our mitochondria in our body. And some we can excrete, some not as much. I'm a bad detoxer genetically. I've tested that. So that's where some of my problems are coming from. But really being aware of what is in your perfume, what is in your hygiene products, what is in your cleaning products. I'm hesitant to put on my skin what I'm not putting on my mouth, for one. And I really think some of these perfumes are the new smoking.
Yeah, let's talk about perfume, because I know that, if I've ever had a migraine, it was triggered. Yeah. There's a couple of perfumes in the world that, and it's interesting because I do think there seems to be more awareness now, at least in the circles I move in, where there's a little bit less of it. But sometimes you hit a person, and I think one of the ones that used to trigger me, sorry guys, I think it was called opium. And it was, and it might just be a personal thing, but there was a heaviness to that scent that I could literally feel a headache coming on. And again, I'm not going to say it was I've had very bad headaches, but can you talk a little bit about how are these perfumes triggering these problems for people?
Would love to. And the ones that have a migraine, like remember, migraine is a warning signal, even a headache, right? You're the lucky one because you know, oh gosh, this is really bad for you. But some of you might not even notice or might feel slightly uncomfortable, but not really do anything about it. So perfumes, over 50% of perfumes have toxic substances in them because they're completely non-regulated. Because the regulatory authorities think, okay, it doesn't go on in your mouth. You don't eat it, so it doesn't matter. But this couldn't be far further from the truth. We talked about the blood-brain barrier already in the context of getting fuels in. Well, the blood-brain barrier is there to protect us. There's one part where it's actually broken and it needs to be broken, and that is the nose. You cannot smell if you don't get the chemicals into your brain. This, in the inverse, this also means a perfume doesn't even need to pass your gut or the blood-brain barrier. It just goes straight into your brain. So toxins in perfume will go straight into your brain and then cause oxidative stress or whatever. Oxidative stress is the number one denominator of all migraine triggers. We quickly touched upon some common migraine triggers. Hormones going down prior to your period increases oxidative stress because estrogen and progesterone are very protective antioxidant substances. Alcohol raises oxidative stress. Exercise raises oxidative stress. Fasting lowers energy and eventually can also contribute to oxidative stress due to cortisol being higher. Caffeine can raise oxidative stress due to cortisol. So almost all migraine triggers can be related to oxidative stress increase.
Wow,
and that's what a toxin will do when it goes through your brain. And that's how it turns on the warning signal. The migraine pain is a release of neuropeptides that hurts. And then it forces you to rest. Right?
Yeah. So I have a question for you. I have sometimes thought that a migraine came from the left side of my nose. Is that possible?
I think it can. Maybe you breathe something in.
I breathe something in and it just that's so interesting that you say that, because it'll be the left side of my nose and then eventually it settles in my left, like above my left eye.
Then if it goes in here, right, then we have something going through here, which is called the trigeminal nerve.
Yeah, it's major fissure.
Innervating. It goes through here, it goes here, and goes here. For me, it always starts here.
In the cheekbone.
For you, it starts here. So that could be the first arm of the trigeminal nerve going on here.
Interesting.
I don't think it necessarily means that it would go through your left nose or whatever, but it will go into the brain and then it will trigger oxidative stress and the release of neuropeptides. And they could be released only on one side of the brain.
Well, I've often thought that a headache could be related to vasoconstriction or vasodilation. So the expansion or the contraction of blood vessels in the brain. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I know that for some people that can be like one or the other can be a trigger.
So that was thought to be true for a very long time. Actually, they thought that migraine is more like a neurovascular problem. Now, interestingly, that has kind of been debunked a little bit in the sense that the timing didn't work. So the pain started before the dilation happened or the other way around, right? So I think it's more an epiphenomena that when there's a lot of increase of inflammation, that the vessels, of course, react, right?
Right. And
so
you're trying to
it's not the actual trigger. It is a phenomenon. It's true. It happens with headache 100%, but the timing wasn't just right for it to be the actual root cause, but more like a process that is also happening during headaches or migraine. So it's real, but probably not where it all started.
What I'm hearing you say is that all these common triggers that people associate with migraine being the hormonal, like women who get a migraine at a certain time in their cycle, for example, or people who get migraine, who have like a smell triggered a migraine or a food trigger. I mean, you've mentioned a lot of different triggers today. It all comes back down to the same challenge, which is oxidative. Is that right? Or
I think you're pretty spot on. I wouldn't say it's all energy metabolism because in the end, if you are hormone deficient, for example, if you don't have enough estrogen or progesterone, then you definitely would need bioidentical hormones. And then that will buffer the oxidative stress. But I think that so we even published this in Nature Neurology, all the pathways that could trigger to this, all the way from genetics and trigger to the resolution of the attack. I think even in the case of hormonal migraine, the actual trigger of the release of the pro-inflammatory peptides that will be the migraine pain are triggered by oxidative stress increase. Because if you don't have the hormones, then you have increased oxidative stress and then the body is warning you, right?
Because you don't have a sufficiency of hormone. So what if somebody, let's say, gets hormone therapy, but they're still getting the migraine at that time of the month? Is it possible then that something else, like that, could it be multifactorial?
It's always multifactorial in the sense that even if you have your hormones perfect, but now your mitochondria are suffering, right? Then you still get oxidative stress because you get energy deficient. You might also have a lack of magnesium, or you might be vitamin D deficient. You might have a thyroid problem on top of so if you have one hormone system non-functioning, could be other hormones that are also infected. So they're, affected. They're all interconnected. You might have enough melatonin, which nobody's looking into. Melatonin is the most potent antioxidant, one of the best things you can take for migraine as well, because it gets inside of the mitochondria and can protect them there. So high dose melatonin, I'm a huge fan. It's also hormonal, right?
Tell me about high dose melatonin. It's because everybody's got a different definition of high dose. Some people think it's 3 milligrams. I've heard of 20 milligrams using in oncological studies.
For me, 3 to 5 milligrams is like the standard
Milligrams.
dose.
Okay.
That's the standard. I wouldn't call that high dose. So for me, a high dose starts at like 10 milligrams upwards.
So so basically, if somebody's getting a migraine, they might try taking.
No, I just say what is a high dose. I don't want anybody to try 10 milligrams immediately. So, of course, and also none of this is medical advice. This is just scientific and self-experimentation. So please talk to your medical professional before changing anything. But what I would do if I were that patient is I would probably start somewhere around 3 milligrams. And with melatonin, the beauty is as soon as you start feeling hangover in the morning or you're getting nightmares, you know the dose is too high because you have enough antioxidant defense and melatonin yourself. I have a funny story about that if you have the time. But then work yourself up, 3, 5, 10. I can take 40 milligrams. And
this is at night or during the day?
I take it at night, but I've experimented with during the day. It makes me a little bit drowsy, so I stopped doing that. I think during the day you have to titrate yourself up even more slowly, but we do need melatonin even during the day. I have not successfully implemented this yet, but I know it can be done and I should probably do it. But I have a lot of meetings during the day and I have a hard time getting out of bed as it is. Yeah. So I need to work.
The people I know who use it during the day therapeutically, they swear by getting direct sunlight, like getting into sunlight so that it offsets the drowsiness of the melatonin.
How much do they take during the day versus at night?
I can't even, I can't say the number because it's so high, it would make your hair curl.
No, tell me. I mean, I know somebody who takes 60 milligrams during the day.
Yeah, I've spoken to people who've taken upwards of 100 milligrams.
Yeah, it doesn't shock me. Eventually they use a gram, right? I think it's one of the least toxic substances. And it's so crazy how in Europe, until a couple of years ago, it was banned. You couldn't get more than a milligram.
People in the UK, I think, need a prescription to get melatonin.
So in Germany, this has been cleared now. But yeah, I'm not surprised in the UK, they still need a prescription. For us, it was like this until like 2 years ago or so.
That's incredible. Okay, so melatonin can be part of the solution for people.
Yeah, but it's a hormone. So this is important. A hormone always has to be in a certain range, right? The same with, say you're on bioidentical hormone therapy and you still feel crap. Maybe it's not a good balance. Maybe you're too high, right? It's hormones always need to be in an optimal level. Otherwise, too much of a good thing is a bad thing, especially with hormones, right? So that is important. I can tell one quick anecdote. I was mixing melatonin in for my mom as well. She's got similar mitochondrial issues than me, not as bad, but similar. And so I was mixing that in. We have our Christmas party. Some relatives were over. Was mixing that into water for later on to drink. And suddenly, halfway through dinner, my dad is like, "Oh my God, I'm so tired. Can't keep my eyes open. I'm so tired. I don't know what to do." And like, it was super early in the day. He just had to go to bed. And then we look at that glass and he drank my mom's melatonin powder. It was 10 milligram, but for him, it was, he's the healthiest in the family. It knocked him out completely, right? It was way too much. So it's very individual, right?
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I can take 10 milligrams and I can easily keep my eyes open all night if I must, right? But
interesting. So you also had mentioned in passing earlier vitamin D3. Mm-hmm. Is there some research around vitamin D3 and migraines as well? Or
there is a little bit. I think there's one positive trial where on, I think it was 25, and what would that be? 2,000 or 4,000 IUs. Mm-hmm. That was significantly reducing migraine occurrence, which I shouldn't be saying. That was helping people manage their migraine. It's the proper way of it, but yeah.
Well, and possibly was it about getting them into a particular therapeutic, like with vitamin D3 in particular, it's about hitting that
range.
Number,
and
the range.
Ideally, they would look at that, but they didn't. So this is more like we give a certain range. Are people getting better? And obviously, the ones that were far outside the range would probably profit much more, and the ones that are already in the range would probably not profit at all. So. Exactly. Okay,
so let's go back, if you don't mind, let's go back to those ketones, because you've mentioned, you mentioned bioidentical ketones, and there's all kinds of ketone products out in the world right now. So, and I believe one was developed in Oxford, was it not?
Yes. And that's a bit of a Romeo and Juliet story, but I won't go in there because probably nobody cares. But so it was developed in Oxford. I never really spoke to the inventor in person. But the thing is here, we need to look at this from like the health longevity perspective. So the Oxford ketone ester is one molecule of beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is the ketone body that we want that is bioidentical, bound to an alcohol called butanediol. Butanediol is an alcohol. It's metabolized like an alcohol, but it can turn into ketone bodies. But when you metabolize this butanediol, you lose 4 NAD plus molecules on the way, which is NAD plus is one of those things you have very low in chronic disease, and you really want to keep that up when you're aging. And you are basically having the consequences of alcohol consumption. So 50% of that molecule is alcohol. So we've seen, or colleagues have seen, signs of liver failure in epilepsy patients, and in healthy patients, signs of liver enzymes going up fairly quickly when you take those chronically. So that's not anything I would recommend for anybody who wants to live a longevity life, because you have the benefits of the ketones, but then you are basically reducing the effect with
there's a cost.
Alcohol, right? So then you might have an ulcer effect. I don't know. That's nothing I would recommend to a patient whose liver is already struggling like mine, right? So I wouldn't recommend that long term. I know this has been taken a lot by athletes, fit and healthy. They take this for a race, maybe completely fine, right? But if you're a patient, or if you're older, or you have a chronic condition, or you just want your liver to be at your best behavior, I think we should be aware of the fact that we're also ingesting alcohol. Now, the most ketone esters that are on the market have this butanediol, and they even sell straight butanediol in other products in the US as well, and call it a ketone supplement. So then we're going to have the BHB attached to it. It will be metabolized to the BHB, but that comes at a cost. So that's why I would say, please be careful, read the labels, and get some more information on this. Now, we use the D-beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is the version that is mostly used for energy in the body. That's the energy metabolite. That's the ketone body that is most prominent in the body. So it's this human identical version. We attach that to magnesium and calcium, just because magnesium you need anyway in high doses in migraine. It's a very bioavailable form of magnesium. And then calcium in a dose where it's also beneficial. And then we add all these other 35 bioavailable nutrients I'm just showing here, which range from, your trace minerals that we discussed earlier, over your electrolytes, amino acids like L-carnitine, taurine. Then we have choline, we have B vitamins, we have antioxidants such as CoQ10, we have the mixed tocopherols, vitamin E, and so on, all in doses that have been studied, or a third of these have been studied in migraine trials, but also in doses that you would need to have a healthy metabolism.
Yeah. So it's hydroxybutyrate attached to calcium and magnesium.
Hydroxybutyrate, and it's D-beta-hydroxybutyrate. Maybe I need to explain that to listeners as well.
D-hydroxybutyrate. Okay.
And you might know this from like L-leucine, L-lysine, you have DL. And going back to chemistry class, when you have a molecule that has different functional groups, beta-hydroxybutyrate has different functional groups, a bit like my hand has different fingers. Each finger is different to the other. Then you automatically have a different orientation in space if you build this molecule. A bit like my hand has two orientations in space. No matter what I do, I can never align my two hands, even though they have the same ingredients, the same functional groups, I can never align them, right? Yeah. And the same is true for molecules in nature, such as amino acids, or for the ketone body. So you have L-BHB. That might have some good signaling molecule properties that is recently more researched on, but the DBHB is the one that the body makes predominantly. So D-beta-hydroxybutyrate, and from the butyrate, you can already tell it's very similar to what a healthy gut microbiome would make for your brain in terms of energy. And a healthy gut microbiome can also produce some of the ingredients that we have in Brain Ritual. But who has a healthy microbiome these days anymore? Yeah. That's another issue.
Let's back up a tiny bit. So what you're proposing is that people can keep eating a normal diet and use DBHB, so dehydroxybutyrate, that ketone body, they can supplement with that and get enough benefit from that to keep the brain healthy and get all those side effects, like be anti-inflammatory, antioxidative,
so some research shows that these mechanisms are due to the presence of the BHB and not necessarily the whole absence of carbohydrates.
Right.
Now, it completely depends on your goal. I think especially in neurological, neuropsychiatric, brain health conditions, the presence of BHB is very advantageous. Of course, that being said, what's a normal diet? I would never recommend anybody to have an unhealthy diet, because that's not no product, no supplement, no whatsoever will ever undo an unhealthy lifestyle.
100%.
What I'm suggesting is, and that's what I do, what I think personally is possible, that you have a low GI whole foods diet, because then you still have the colorful vegetables, you have some fruit, and on a carnivore or a strict ketogenic diet, food variety is so limited that I don't think it can be guaranteed that you have all your micronutrients forever. You have to really do it properly with liver and bone broth and whatever, right? And really have to know what you're doing. It's way more easy to get a balanced nutrient profile with antioxidants, trace minerals, and so on if you have a broader array of foods, healthy foods, organic where possible, or low toxin, right? So I do low GI diet. I still eat sweet potatoes, right? Some tubers. I eat fruit in all shapes and forms. Maybe too much, but then you have the ketone bodies. You can either then take them, for example, if you have a low carb breakfast, if you really don't want insulin and glucose elevated at the same time as you have ketone bodies elevated, then you can have a low carb breakfast and have it with that, or have it early in the morning and then you have your breakfast a couple of hours later, and then the peak is already down. Or you can sip it between meals so that the distance to the next glucose meal is a little bit further away. What most people don't realize is you will always have glucose present at the same time as ketones, even if you're starving.
Yeah.
40%, up to 40% of your calories in the brain have to come from glucose, or you're dead, right? It's not like we can replace it fully.
A lot of people are still running around saying that the brain prefers, that the brain can do without glucose, that it prefers ketones. And I believe that the real truth is the brain needs glucose.
As females or people that are chronically sick, what I overlooked, a ketogenic diet is a stressful diet. Now, if you are a healthy athlete or a man who doesn't cycle, that's fine, right? But if you're already sick and now you're adding fasting as a stressor, now you're adding a ketogenic diet that is strict as a stressor, your thyroid function might go down. For me, my blood glucose in the morning was way higher than when I eat carbs. And that's the stress in the morning. That's the Stone phenomena, right? So you really need to listen to your body. Anybody who strives on a low carb diet, all power to you, right? Do it, whatever feels good. Anybody who doesn't thrive may still have the chance to get the benefits of ketone body presence without the necessity to go on a super strict ketogenic diet. That's basically what we're offering. And even if you're on a strict ketogenic diet, my values in ketone bodies were really never very high. So even those that do a ketogenic diet and have struggling liver can bump up their values a bit, or allow them a little bit more flexibility. Also, when they go to a restaurant and you don't have full control on what's on the menu, this could help as well. Or simply in the transition period, or as a bit of a top up, multivitamin protection. And I think it's important we're not all created equal, and especially in the longevity space. There's one more thing I want to say. Everything that is recommended these day and age online, you have to be aware these are stressors. Now, if you use stressors in your so-called hormetic window, your window of growth, you will grow. If you add hormetic stressors or even stresses to your mitochondria, and it takes you outside of your window of growth, you will hurt yourself and you will age quicker. Hormetic stresses that are currently used is sauna, or this cold exposure. Cold exposure is extreme stress for the body, right? Within reason, you grow because it was a stress. Without reason, you'll get a migraine, you'll be shivering, you might get sick because you don't have the energy to fight the virus that is next door, right? And then also fasting as a stressor. Within reason is good for you. Extended ketogenic forever, especially in women, they stop getting their period. All of these things are good if they're done in a way that feels good and is not overpowering your antioxidant system. Especially true for migraine, but also true for anybody who is interested in a long and healthy life.
Yeah. I have another question for you. So have you done any studies to see if someone feels a migraine coming on, if they introduce the DBHP, can that help some people to stave it off?
Now, we haven't done any formal studies because they're very expensive. So I only have data from like the full formula, not just BHB on its own, but with everything that's in there. We have many anecdotes and customers, because it's already available, writing us. They thought this is like a long-term solution. They took it when a migraine was first appearing and it went away completely. We also have this for normal tension type headache and for hangovers. And now, just recently, I was like, how the hell is this working? Okay, it's antioxidant, but it shouldn't be a painkiller. But just now that you mention it, just like last week or so, a review came out outlining the research that BHB ketone bodies are actually analgesic themselves directly. So that makes a lot of sense. So now I can say, yes, there's quite a bit of evidence that it can be used acutely for pain, such migraine or headache. At the first onset, the earlier the better always.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the anti-inflammatory aspect, especially for the brain, can't be overstated. I think there's a gentleman who he makes these ketone drinks, and he talks a lot about when in the presence of a brain injury, how introducing ketone, like a TBI, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
The faster you can get ketones on board, the more you can manage the damage, the long-term damage to the brain, just because of the anti-inflammatory effect. Plus, he was saying that the brain becomes almost insulin resistant in the presence of an injury. And I don't know if that's actually exact, but again, providing ketones as an alternative fuel source seems to be brain protective in that crisis.
You have the inflammation, you have the oxidative stress, right? The free radicals that also wreak havoc, and you have an energy shortage because you don't have the supply. So giving a better energy supply also makes sense. So absolutely makes a lot of sense to do that. And I know one of my colleagues has done early studies on TBI in the emergency room. She used a ketogenic diet protocol. So bless her. I don't know how she did that in an emergency setting. Insane. But that was effective.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think that bringing the exogenous ketones, I mean, it takes a while for somebody to start producing their own ketones. So bringing the exogenous ketones on board, even as a short-term, immediate solution as they transition, you're expanding your work now beyond the migraine world, which is where you started, and you have this very strong personal interest, but you're moving into other areas of brain health as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. The more I learned, I started with migraine, I had to help myself, but the more I figured out about migraine in general, brain and metabolism, was that a lot of these neuropsychiatric issues we see today, from a symptom perspective, look very differently to our modern medical doctor, right? But from a root cause perspective, they may have actually way more in common than we think. So mitochondrial dysfunction, mitochondria are the powerhouses of our cells, are damaged or reduced. Mitochondrial function is reduced in almost all neuropsychiatric diseases I know. And maybe, again, from an evolutionary perspective, we have to quickly look at what these mitochondria are, because a lot of people nowadays know about the gut microbiome and that it's bacteria that are beneficial. Now, actually, we have another species of bacteria living in our cells, sometimes even 10,000 of them, that are at least as important. So if we go back now millions and millions of years, when the earth was just a soup and earthquakes and suddenly, or for the first time, oxygen has come into the atmosphere. We had bacteria living in that soupy liquid, and we had the first single-celled organisms swimming around. Now, the bacteria had a problem with oxygen. Now we have these bombs, this oxidative stress, right? And the bacteria are very vulnerable for that. We have the single-cell organisms. They want to grow. They want to multiply. They needed energy. So this is the first coalition millions of years ago when the bacteria fused with that single-cell organism. And the deal was the bacteria will now make energy for the single-cell organism, and the single-cell organism will protect the bacteria from oxidative stress. And to this day, all of our cells, from the single-cell organism to complex humans, all of our cells still have these ancient bacteria inside of them. And these bacteria are called mitochondria. And they're known for making energy, powerhouse of the cells, but they're also heavily involved in detoxification and in all sorts of other producing melatonin and all sorts of other vital functions for the body. So I think there's really an era of mitochondrial health coming. But right now we don't have so much to do, and it's not really tested much. I mean, for me, my mitochondria are quite damaged. I could test that in Germany now. We have some advanced labs that might also be available in America.
Definitely, there's testing mitochondria.
Tests now, yeah, which is amazing because 10 years ago, nobody knew. Like people were like, "Oh, you have fatigue." Like, so what? Your labs look normal. Well, if you test the wrong thing, then of course it looks normal.
Exactly.
So mitochondria is super, super important, and that's what I want to bring back because now we know that almost everything we do in the current day and age is damaging the mitochondria. So it's the common pathway, the common point of weakness that we have, especially in neuropsychiatric conditions. So all the blue light, multitasking, late night working, bad sleep, processed foods, oxidative stress, toxins, toxic relationships, not saying no, all the psychological trauma that one could go through, all of these eventually are actually hitting on those coalition partners of ours, the mitochondria. And that's why it's so important. And a lot of the neuropsychiatric diseases that we know are actually brain energy deficiency syndromes in that sense. And if you fix the metabolism, if you help the mitochondria, then you may also significantly improve neuropsychiatric diseases outside of migraine. So we're now halfway through doing a depression trial, and we're going to start an Alzheimer trial, early stage Alzheimer trial by the end of this year or beginning of next year. So we just signed up.
Amazing. Oh, congratulations. That's fantastic. Do you think that there are certain types of migraines that we still don't know enough about? Like, do you think outside of what we've talked about today, are there migraines that are driven by a different process that we still don't get?
Oh, that's a great question. And I would even say we don't know anything about migraine subtypes. So, I mean, that's the truth. I mean, we're trying to coin the metabolic migraine subtype. We published that. But if you just look in a neurology book, you have migraine with or without aura. That's basically, is there the presence of this phase of sensory disability or not? Then we might have menstrual migraine. Is it occurring close to your period or not? And then we have this rare inborn, really like small mutation forms of migraine that you can identify because it's a very specific genetic mutation, very rare. That's about it. And then they have this vestibular migraine, which basically just means do you also have vertigo with your migraine? So it's basically symptom based. So
yeah, what a nightmare.
Neurology knows nothing about migraine subtypes, and I really think, and I'm glad you asked this is where we need to go as a field. We have these two extreme sides now. One says there's migraine, and migraine is the disease, and everybody's the same. And then we have the other side saying, oh, we need to individually treat every patient differently. But then one, of course, is a problem. Not every migraine is the same. And trying to treat every single migraine as their own migraine subtype is going to bankrupt the whole health insurance system, right? We probably can't do that either. So I think we really need to go into a way, whether that's migraine or Alzheimer or depression, in trying to subcategorize common subgroups of these common diseases. And a metabolic migrainer has probably more in common root cause wise with a metabolic Alzheimer patient or a metabolic depressed patient than with, for example, a hormonal migraine patient. We probably have pure hyperexcitability migraine where there's a mutation in an ion channel or right there where we need to especially look at electrolytes, sodium, and so on. We might have a toxic migraine subtype where it's mercury, lead, whatever accumulating in the brain, Alzheimer, build up of toxins, where the primary thing you need to do to fix the system is a safe removal of heavy metals, which is super hard to be done. I've been there myself, but can be achieved to an extent. So, but this is like subtypes based on root causes, not symptoms.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think, we've kind of gone two different ways today. To some degree, I think that one of the things you may have said, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the bottom line is a lot of these, many, if not all of these migraines share this mitochondrial insufficiency, as it were, and an increase in like a challenge in dealing with reactive oxygen species, with neuroinflammation. And so there's a good chance that, like a product like Brain Ritual, providing that alternative fuel source, the right ketones with the micronutrients, all this other stuff, might help to solve a lot of those foundational problems. But you still are going to have to possibly address whether it's hormones, whether it's toxins, and really and stay the heck away from people who insist on wearing toxic perfume. Suffice to say, folks, if you're still using those perfumes, please don't.
There's organic versions now, which are much essential oils. Like if you want to smell nice, natural essential oils does the trick. At least, and you also, you will get a desensitization. It's the same as with sugar. You also get the same with smells. You just need more and more perfume because you basically numb. You kill, right? Yeah. But once you get rid, like give yourself a period of a couple of weeks of like no extreme smells. Now you will smell the flowers again, right? You will smell your food differently. You will taste differently. The same, once you cut out processed foods for a while, everything will not be sweet enough. But after some time, your receptors will normalize and a strawberry or an apple will taste extremely sweet to you, right? So that's something, it's the best you can do, and you will get the same pleasure from essential oils than you probably got from your perfume after you have adapted to it. I think if everybody were to do that, they would be aversive to their own perfumes as well after some time.
Exactly.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. I want to comment to what you said, that it's more an additional tool, right? It's something, it's really hard to do lifestyle changes when you have 20 days of migraine a month. You can hardly get out of bed. You can hardly survive. You're probably close to getting fired in your job, or you already have been. You can hardly take care of your family, right? You need something that helps you quickly to have the power to do anything, really, right? So that's where Brain Ritual, something like Brain Ritual comes in very handy, because it can start helping you hopefully get better and then help you do the lifestyle changes that are ideally necessary, which is getting off the processed foods, which is, I have a 4-pillar migraine mastering model, which is basically mastering metabolism. Maybe just very, very quickly, the first pillar is stabilizing blood glucose. You cannot do that with any product so well. This is really about ideally even measuring. I'm wearing this
the continuous glucose monitor,
right? This like little butt in your arm. Measuring a bit. This is your low GI foods. This is managing your stress, managing your allergies. If you have food allergies, cortisol will make your glucose spike. Watching out for coffee, getting rid of processed foods, quick glucose, and so on. And really trying to make glucose stable, because that will also support glucose for the brain and your organs, right? And will reduce oxidative stress and this like constant glucose roller coaster. That's pillar 1. It has to be done by changing your food habits, right? This is no other way. The second one comes close to what we already discussed, which is making micronutrients available. Now that you've taken care of your macronutrients, which is increase your protein and your healthy fat intake, reduce glucose spikes. Now we're looking at micronutrients. Now, this is where Brain Ritual can help, but I would always also recommend whole foods. Just eating. And I don't mean that you can't cook stuff or that you can't deviate once in a while, right? This is not about perfection. I would rather have imperfection, like 80-20, imperfection some of the time, right, than perfection none of the time. Yeah. So that's pillar 2. Pillar 3 is looking at oxidative stress. This is, for one, increasing antioxidants, which also Brain Ritual can help with, and foods, sulfurous foods have thiol groups that can help detox. But it's also about reducing those free radical bonds, right? And this is where you have to look at chemical stress, physical stress. Physical stress is exercise, fasting, cold exposure within reason, right?
Right. Too much. In other words, too much of a good thing.
And psychological stress. On the cellular level, your psychological stress is oxidative stress, almost looks like chemical stress. So don't, just because somebody has been your friend during childhood doesn't mean they're the best person to be around you today, right? Really get rid of toxins relationships. Also, you can work on the sender receiver. So is the sender of an awful message really intending it this way? Can you receive it differently if you cannot really get rid of the person? Maybe try to see that they're having a bit a bad time, whatever, learning to say no. And there's other coping strategies where you can try to be less stressed, getting more sleep. All of that would feed into that category. And then I've forgotten the second category on the micronutrients. We also need to look at bioidentical hormones. So that's also within the supplementation group. So if you have too little estrogen, progesterone, if you're lacking thyroid hormone, do you lack melatonin? Is there anything else that you need to add to be in suboptimal or subtract to be in optimal ranges? And then the fourth one really is that alternative energy source. Now, if you're fit and healthy, this can be lactate, right? You can get that from exercise. If you're fit and healthy and you're fine with glucose, the first 3 pillars may be enough as long as you have a whole foods diet, you keep glucose stable. Some patients already go a long way, but if it's not enough, you need that alternative energy source. This is where either a ketogenic diet, modified or whatever, fasting or exogenous ketones, hopefully the good kind, come in.
I love that. Okay, a couple of quick questions to finish up. So you have a book pending release, which is really exciting, How to Master Migraines, or is it already out?
It's not out. It's hopefully out. I still need to find a publisher. I found a publisher. I paid them a whole lot of money, and then really bad Google reviews came in. I was like, they're not having me, baby. I wrote this bad book for 10 years. So I need to find a publisher if anybody knows anyone.
All right. Well, if anybody's out there.
It's written. And I have all the lab tests too, and really a guide for either interested lay people to even practitioners can have a look at this, how to really help their patients.
I might be able to connect you with someone. Now, what's one counterintuitive lesson that readers will walk away from your book with?
That a lot of things that the longevity and health space says are good for you can really backfire in migraine. And that you always need to listen to your body. I always thought exercise is good for everyone, so I have to go running. Got a migraine after every time, but sport is good for you. Fasting is good for you, cold exposure is good for you, right? So that everyone is different. You need to listen to your body, and these well-intended general messages can actually backfire for you personally.
Yeah, it's not for everyone. That's very powerful. Okay, so you kind of gave us the 4 pillars, but if there was one thing, one experiment with food or habits that the listeners could start with this week, what would it be? What would be the first step you would ask someone to take?
I think the first step is probably status quo, because sometimes we don't even know what we're ingesting and taking in every day. 1 week or even 1 day, 1 week of a diary. What am I using in a household? What am I washing my clothes with? Just an inventory list. What am I eating the whole day, including snacks, right? Or if I'm out with colleagues, what am I really eating? Being a full honest, that's the first thing I think would be probably observing the status quo. And if you can wear a permanent glucometer, continuous glucometer, doing that, even better. But really a whole list, like what do I ingest through my skin and through my gut and drinks for a week, and then you can start making changes.
Fantastic. I love that. Dr. Elena Gross, thank you so much for extending your day for us, because I know it's late in the day where you are, so you've made your day extra long to be here. So I really appreciate your time. For people who might want to get their hands on this new, so it's a multi I don't want to call it a multivitamin. It's a multi-nutrient supplement built around this whole, the right ketone bodies, Brain Ritual. People can go, it's brainritual.com and then /longevity. With /longevity, your wonderful listeners get $30 off their first purchase if they want to try. So that's brainritual.com /longevity. You might put it in the show notes as well. I will.
And then you get an individualized $30 discount. We'd love to hear from you. We have customer service. We have a chat function on the website. If you have any questions with regards to the brain ritual, whether it might be your brain ritual or not, you can go there. You can go on all social medias. We're Brain Ritual or Dr. Elena Gross on all social medias. I also have a website with a white paper that you might be interested in on the 4 pillars and other things you can do to optimize metabolism as well that we might not have discussed today.
I love it. And you also have a community, right? The Mastering Migraine community.
We have a community on Facebook. It's still small. It's 250 patients. It's a bit intimate, but it's where basically you get to pick my brain on anything that
Beautiful.
you want to learn. And also, if you are experimenting with brain ritual, you can tell us there what you're experiencing. We always love to hear from people how they're doing. That's why I'm doing it all. That's why I'm working hard. If anybody gets better, it will absolutely make my week if you let us know.
Okay, fantastic. Well, once again, Dr. Elena, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your wisdom with the audience.
Nathalie, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for helping us spread the word.